Now we have to prep the largemouth bass for the epoxy step. In the epoxy step, we'll be rebuilding all the shrunken areas. We'll also be fixing all of our areas where the foam is showing and any area that broke or tore out during the skinning and mounting process. To start, we need to put a block on the back of the fish. This is going to be one of our fixture blocks. It's going to give the fish somewhat of a 3D effect when we put it on our piece of driftwood. It also helps during the painting process. Also, when we put this on, it'll hold the bass upright when we set it down on the bench so it's not continuously flipping back. If you recall from when we mounted the largemouth bass, we set a block in the bass using antler set mache. So we're going to be screwing this exterior block into that interior block. We'll be putting it right here. We're going to be using sheet metal screws for this. If you don't have these, you can use heavy-duty drywall screws. We're using a 7/64 drill bit. The drill bit is smaller than the threads on our screw. That's very important. If it was bigger, our screw wouldn't hold anything. We'll be using this to pre-drill into the fish. If we didn't pre-drill, it would be difficult to screw in. This is a 1/4 inch drill. This is what we're going to use to drill through the wood block so that our screw is not held up as it goes through the block. We don't want any resistance as we put the screw into the fish through the block. And we'll just be using our driver to drive those screws in. So to start, we need to just pre-drill 2 holes through the wood block. Again, we use the 1/4 inch drill for that. We flip our fish over. We line our block up where we basically want to put it. Right about there is a good position. We just turn our block so it's level, and we'll pre-drill our other hole. We just check, make sure everything's level. Now we could put a hanger on here and just hang the fish directly on the wall when we're completed, but we're going to be putting this on driftwood, so we do not need to put a hanger on at this time. The prepping step is very important before we epoxy. If we would simply mix up our epoxy now and start, the skin would rehydrate and it would start to bubble and lift up off of the foam, and your epoxy would have a very uneven look. You'd also be getting little bits of foam in your epoxy. The fins are not 100% attached down, as you can see. They have to be attached down or it makes epoxying very difficult. Also, some of the scales might be slightly raised up. That happens during the drying process. We're going to be using a clothes iron to iron those back down. That works really good for that. We also have a hot glue gun set up to hot glue our fins back in place if they come a little bit loose. We have a curved scissors we're going to use to trim our fins. We have a knife for cutting foam if we need it. So I have a little nippers in case we have to nip off a pin head. We have 1-inch bank pins. And we have a little bit of paper here in case we need to bridge something. The first step is to pull off our carding from our fin process. If you recall from the fin lesson, we did 3 different varieties of fins to show you the different ways you could do it. I normally like to use just one kind of fin method when I'm doing this, possibly 2. You could use a silk span method and maybe a hard-backed method if you had a fin that was broken. You see how we had our freezer paper down with the shiny side against the fin, so it just easily pulls right away. Okay, we have everything pulled off the fins. Now we did have a little bit of glue on our tail fin right here that came through a little heavy, and there's a little ledge there. And that's very common. I'll just take my knife and just pry that up. Sometimes you can use your fingernail to do this too. You're just trying to remove that little ledge of glue. Because it's flexible, it'll peel away fairly easily. Now we're going to trim our fins. We're going to be trimming off the excess coffee filter or silk span and the excess paper from around our fin. We're using our curved scissors for that. Obviously on the pectoral fin there's no trimming to do because we kept the fin completely natural and just put flexible glue on it. Just following the curve of the fin right along. Repeat the process on the show side fin. And we'll do the same thing on our anal fin. Okay, now we'll do the tail fin. And we're just following the natural curve of the fin right around. We're keeping a little bit of the white area here and there because some of the fin was missing, so that actually rebuilds it for us. Okay. Now we'll do our soft dorsal. A little hard to see me coming around here on this edge, but okay, all the fins are trimmed. And as you can recall, we didn't do anything to the spiny dorsal yet. We'll put some glue on that at the end, but we don't have to put any backing on the spiny dorsal unless it's severely broken. Now I'm just going to take my finger and run it over each one of the fins, make sure that there's any little glue that had came through where the pinholes were, and just scrape that off. Because it's flexible, it'll scrape off fairly easily. Now we just have to glue our fins back in place that loosen up from the mounting process. The pectoral fin loosened up and the pelvic fins loosened up. So what we do is I'm just going to push it forward. Sometimes you have to break it forward a little bit. You can see underneath the fin. I'm going to take a little bit of my hot glue and just put a small amount underneath that fin. I'm just going to push it into place. You don't want to get it too close to the fish, and you don't want it sticking straight out either. Something that looks natural. Okay, we'll just check these fins. This particular fin here seems like it's in pretty good. I don't need to do anything with that, but this fin here is very loose. I'm just going to put a little bit of hot glue underneath that one. Same procedure, just push it up into place. Let's hold it there until it dries. We check it over one more time to make sure we have good integrity all over the bass and there's no other raised scales. And everything seems like it's really good. So the next step will be 5-minuting off all the areas we prepped, and then we can proceed with the epoxy step. Now that we have our bass prepared for epoxying, we have to cement down our repairs. To do that, we're going to use 5-minute epoxy. This is quick cure. I get this from Mackenzie. You can use other kinds of 5-minute as well. Most hardware stores will carry 5-minute epoxy. This is different than the apoxy we're going to be using to rebuild the repair areas. This is just to hold everything in place. What this does is it stops the skin from getting any moisture on it and bubbling up, and it also locks down our foam so it doesn't get into our epoxy. This is mixed up 50-50, equal parts. You don't need to mix up a very large amount for this. Whenever you're using 5-minute epoxy, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. Okay, now we have equal parts on our piece of cardboard. We're going to take our mixing stick and just mix this together. The working time on 5-minute epoxy is about 3 minutes, so you don't want to spend too much time mixing or applying it. You want to keep moving pretty quickly when you're using this stuff. What's nice about it is after you have it all mixed up and you have it applied, you don't have to wait very long before you start your epoxy rebuilding process. You can move right on to the next step. And I'm just going to take a throwaway acid brush. We're going to start by applying it to the area, the gullet area on the fish. I'm going to put a little bit here right at the base of our pectoral fin to hold these scales down. Sometimes you'll have a few little bristles come out. You just take those out of your 5-minute. I want to get a lot of it on this foam back here. I don't want any of this foam to get into my finished epoxying. You'll know what I'm talking about as soon as you start doing that. If you get any little piece of foam in your epoxy, you can leave little marks and lines. So that's why we cement it down. I'm also going to take a small amount of it. I'm just going to brush it underneath the gill cover on both the show side and the back side. That just gives that some more strength and stability. We'll also be putting a little bit of epoxy under there to help with that as well. You want to avoid getting this on your gill rakers. It'll leave little balls of 5-minute epoxy on there that aren't natural, so avoid that. If you do have that, just cut those out. Putting a little bit under here. I'm going to take a small amount and just put it right at the top of the head juncture. This just stops these scales from raising up when we do some epoxy rebuilding work up here. Anywhere you're going to get moisture or water, anywhere near this fish, needs to have a little bit of 5-minute there. If you get moisture on your scales, it can lift them up. So that's why we do that. A little bit of base of this fin, because this fin was a little loose and there's some loose skin here, so that's going to lock that in place. Had a few raised scales back here. I'm just going to fill those in and lock those down with my 5-minute. put a little bit behind the mandibles. When I put a little bit of my epoxy here, I just want to make sure that skin stays put. So get a little bit there. And I'm just going to take a small amount and put it right on the vent. And that's it. We'll just set this aside and let this dry for about 10 minutes.